She saved 157 people. Nobody noticed her face. Nobody knew her secret. Just a woman. Gray sweater. Old book. But she was a Top Gun graduate hiding for 5 years. When this plane broke apart at 33,000 feet, her voice hit the radio. 2 F-16 pilots went silent. They knew that call sign. Phantom. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. It was a Thursday evening. The date was September 27, 2012. The time was 6:47 p.m. Portland International Airport in Oregon was covered in a soft, steady rain. The kind of rain that does not pour hard but never stops either. The kind of rain that belongs to the Pacific Northwest in autumn. The terminal windows were wet with tiny drops. Outside, low gray clouds hung over the city, hiding the Cascade Mountains completely. Inside the airport, travelers moved slowly through the halls. They wore fleece jackets and carried umbrellas. They looked tired. They looked ordinary. The departure boards showed small delays because of the weather system moving through the area. At Gate C-12, Alaska Airlines Flight 283 was beginning its delayed boarding process. The flight was going to San Diego, California. It was a north-to-south route along the west coast. Rainy Oregon to sunny Southern California. The aircraft was a Boeing 737-800, configured to carry 157 passengers. It was a narrow-body plane, the kind used every day for short and medium flights across America. The gate area was filled with the usual mix of people. Tech workers from Portland's growing software industry were heading to San Diego for conferences. Retirees were escaping the autumn cold for warmer weather. Families carried beach bags and vacation gear, looking excited despite the delays. It was a completely normal Thursday evening flight. Among the passengers walking down the jetway and filing onto the aircraft was a woman who took her seat in 11B. The middle seat. Starboard side. She boarded in a way that made her almost impossible to notice. Not because she was trying to hide. Or at least, that is what it looked like. She simply seemed to exist in a state of total ordinariness. She appeared to be somewhere in her late 30s to early 40s. Her age was actually difficult to pin down because she had one of those faces that looks 35 in good light and 45 in a darker room. She was approximately 5 feet 7 inches tall. Her build was slender and clearly fit, but not in a way that anyone would comment on. She had no visible muscle definition. She simply had the lean, efficient body of someone who stays in shape without ever talking about it or showing it off. Her features suggested Scandinavian or Northern European heritage. Pale skin. High cheekbones. Thin lips. And most noticeably, very pale blue-gray eyes that seemed almost colorless in certain lighting. Like winter sky just before snow. Her ash-blonde hair was cut in a shoulder-length style. It was not fashionable. It was not outdated either. It was simply neutral. Practical. The kind of haircut that says nothing about the person wearing it. Her clothing was even more unremarkable. Medium-wash jeans that could have come from any mall store in America. A plain gray crewneck sweater. Black ballet flats. A simple black nylon tote bag. No jewelry except a basic Timex watch on her left wrist. No makeup. No nail polish. Nothing that could be used to describe her to someone who had not seen her. She moved through the boarding process with the smooth, quiet efficiency of someone who has boarded thousands of aircraft. She settled into the middle seat, the seat that every experienced traveler tries to avoid, without any visible complaint or reaction. She reached into her tote bag immediately and pulled out a mass-market paperback. John Grisham. A legal thriller. She also pulled out a simple pair of reading glasses with thin black frames. She opened the book to her bookmark, put on her glasses, and began to read. There was something almost too perfect about how ordinary she was. Like someone who had studied what an average person looks like and then worked very hard to become that exact thing. Like someone who had practiced being forgettable the way other people practice being memorable. You were sitting in 11C. The window seat, right next to her. You had already claimed the armrest and were slightly annoyed that the middle seat had been taken. When she sat down, you looked at her for maybe half a second. Your brain registered, plain woman, probably an accountant or a middle manager, looks completely boring. Then you put in your earbuds and turned to look out the rain-streaked window, completely dismissing her from your attention. You had no idea. You had absolutely no idea at all. Her name was Dr. Rachel Lindstrom. She was 42 years old. But Rachel Lindstrom was actually her legal name now, a name she had been using for 17 years. Before that, she had a different name. That person, the person with the other name, did not exist anymore. Or at least, that is what Rachel had been telling herself for 5 years. The gray sweater and the jeans and the ballet flats were calculated choices. Every morning, Rachel Lindstrom chose her clothes the same way a soldier chooses camouflage. She dressed to disappear. She dressed to be the person that other people look through, not at. She had become extremely good at it. What the people around her on Flight 283 did not know, what you in Seat 11C did not know, was that Rachel Lindstrom had spent 12 years in the United States Navy as a fighter pilot. Not a cargo pilot. Not a trainer pilot. A fighter pilot. She had flown F-18 Super Hornets from aircraft carriers. The real thing. She had completed 3 combat deployments to the Persian Gulf, flying strike missions over Iraq and Afghanistan during the years after September 11th. She had flown in actual wars. She had dropped actual weapons on actual targets. She had also graduated from the Navy Fighter Weapons School. Most people know it from the 1986 movie as Top Gun. The real name is the Naval Strike and Air Warfare Center, and it operates out of Naval Air Station Fallon in Nevada. It is the most elite fighter pilot training program in the United States Navy. The Navy does not send average pilots there. The Navy sends its very best pilots there, the ones who have already proven themselves in the fleet, to study advanced tactics and combat techniques and to eventually become instructors who train the next generation. Being accepted to fighter weapons school is the mark of an exceptional pilot. Graduating from it is something else entirely. Rachel had graduated from fighter weapons school in 2002, as part of a class that would talk about her for years afterward. She was one of only 4 women to graduate from the school during her era, in the late 1990s and early 2000s, when female fighter pilots were still genuinely rare in the Navy. She had broken through barriers not by making noise or demanding recognition but simply by being better than almost everyone around her. That was her way. Her call sign was Phantom. She had earned it during a training exercise at Fallon. In a simulated air combat scenario, she had engaged and destroyed 3 adversary aircraft in such rapid, unexpected succession, using tactical approaches that nobody else in the exercise had thought of, that the debrief instructor had shaken his head and said, "You're like a phantom. Nobody saw you coming. Nobody knew what hit them. And by the time they realized you were there, they were already dead." The name stuck. In the fighter pilot community, where call signs become identities, she became Phantom. Rachel had been considered by her instructors and her commanding officers to be one of the most naturally gifted fighter pilots of her generation. Not just among women. Among everyone. She had an almost supernatural ability to read an aerial combat situation. She could predict what her opponent was going to do before they did it. She could execute maneuvers that other pilots could not even visualize clearly. She had what the instructors at Top Gun called situational awareness beyond normal parameters, which is their way of saying she understood the 3-dimensional battle around her in ways that most people simply cannot. She had left the Navy in 2007, at age 37, after reaching the rank of commander. When people asked why someone at the absolute peak of her career would walk away, she gave the official answer: pursuing civilian opportunities. That was a lie. Or not a lie exactly, but a very incomplete truth. The real reason was something Rachel had never told anyone completely. During a combat mission over Afghanistan in 2006, Rachel had dropped ordnance, bombs, on a compound that military intelligence had identified as a Taliban stronghold. The intelligence was wrong. Or it was partially wrong. The compound was indeed used by Taliban fighters. But it was also home to a family. When the bombs struck, 7 civilians died. 3 of them were children. The military investigation cleared her. The targeting had been legitimate based on the available intelligence. The intelligence failure was at a level above her. These things happen in war. The investigation said it officially. The military closed the case and moved on. Rachel could not move on. She started having nightmares. She would wake up at 3 in the morning with the faces of those 3 children behind her eyes. She would lie in the dark and think about the fact that she had been so proud of her precision, her efficiency, her tactical brilliance, her ability to execute the mission perfectly, and the mission had killed children. The skills she had worked so hard to develop. The gift she had been so proud of. Had those skills made her something broken? Had she always been broken, and the Navy had simply found a use for the broken part of her? She requested an early separation from active duty. She used her GI Bill benefits, the educational package available to veterans, to earn a PhD in clinical psychology. She became a trauma therapist, specializing in post-traumatic stress disorder. She treated veterans. She treated people who had survived terrible things and were trying to rebuild their sense of self. She was good at it. She understood her patients in ways that therapists without military background sometimes did not, because she had been through something similar herself. She moved to Portland. She changed her appearance, not dramatically, but systematically. She cut her hair differently. She stopped wearing anything that might signal military. She developed her wardrobe of invisible clothes. She stopped talking about her service history entirely. She told new colleagues and neighbors and friends that she had served in the military briefly and that she preferred not to talk about it. People respected that. People in Portland especially respected it. Nobody pushed. For 5 years, almost nobody knew that the quiet trauma therapist in the gray sweater was a Top Gun graduate and a decorated naval aviator who had once been called one of the best fighter pilots of her generation. She was just Dr. Rachel Lindstrom. Therapist. Bookworm. Someone your eyes slid past in a crowd. She was on this particular flight to San Diego not for a therapy conference, as most people who knew her might have assumed. She had been summoned by the Navy to testify at a military inquiry. New evidence had emerged related to the 2006 bombing. The investigation was being reopened. The Navy needed her statement. She had spent weeks dreading this trip. It meant going back. It meant being Commander Phantom again, at least for long enough to face a panel of officers and talk about what had happened on that night in Afghanistan. It meant confronting memories she had worked very hard to bury. Right now, at 6:47 p.m. on this rainy Thursday evening, she was sitting in 11B with her John Grisham novel and her reading glasses, trying very hard to be no one. Flight 283 pushed back from Gate C-12 at 7:11 p.m., 24 minutes behind schedule. The rain was still falling steadily over Portland. The runway lights reflected in the wet tarmac. The aircraft taxied to the end of runway 28R and held briefly while a departing Southwest flight cleared the area. Then the Alaska Airlines 737-800 began its takeoff roll, lifting cleanly off the runway and climbing into the gray Oregon sky. In the cockpit, Captain Douglas Freeman was at the controls. He was 54 years old and had 21,000 flight hours accumulated over 27 years with Alaska Airlines. He was the kind of captain that other crew members liked to fly with, calm, methodical, experienced in exactly the way that the best airline captains are experienced. Not flashy. Not overconfident. Just deeply, solidly competent. He was a grandfather of 6. He had photographs of the grandchildren taped to a corner of his instrument bag. He had handled decompression emergencies twice in his career, both times successfully. He had never experienced anything like what was coming. First Officer Kevin Tanaka was 39 years old with 9,400 hours of flight time. He had spent 9 years in the Air National Guard before transitioning to commercial aviation, flying C-130 cargo aircraft. He understood military aviation culture in a way that would matter later. He was handling radio communications while Freeman flew the aircraft. The flight climbed through the Oregon clouds and leveled off at 33,000 feet over the dark landscape below. It was now fully night. The cabin lights had been dimmed slightly. Passengers had settled into the typical routines of a 2-hour flight, reading, watching downloaded shows on laptops, sleeping, or staring at the darkness outside the windows. Flight attendants had completed their safety demonstration and were preparing the drink service. Rachel Lindstrom had reached Chapter 8 of her John Grisham novel. She was following the story of a lawyer trying to expose corporate fraud, and it was just engaging enough to keep the memories of the upcoming military inquiry at bay. She was not thinking about Afghanistan. She was not thinking about call signs or carrier landings or F divided by a -18s. She was just a woman on an airplane reading a book. At 7:40 p.m. Pacific Time, when Flight 283 was at 33,000 feet, approximately 380 miles south of Portland and over the mountains of Northern California, the rear pressure bulkhead ruptured. The pressure bulkhead is a curved structural wall at the very back of the pressurized section of a commercial aircraft fuselage. It exists because the inside of a pressurized cabin is maintained at the equivalent of 6,000 to 8,000 feet of altitude while the aircraft flies at 33,000 feet. The difference in pressure between inside and outside is enormous. The fuselage and the bulkhead hold that pressure difference together. For years, a network of microscopic cracks had been developing in the metal of this particular aircraft's rear pressure bulkhead. Thousands of pressurization cycles, each flight the aircraft pressurized and then depressurized, had slowly, invisibly weakened the structure. Inspections had missed the cracks. Maintenance reviews had not caught them. And on this night, at this altitude, the accumulated damage finally exceeded what the metal could hold. The rupture was instantaneous and catastrophic. The pressurized air inside the cabin exploded outward through the failed bulkhead and tore a 6-foot hole in the tail section of the aircraft. The sound was a concussive bang that every passenger felt in their chest as much as heard with their ears. The cabin decompressed explosively. The oxygen masks dropped from their overhead compartments. The cold, thin air of high altitude came screaming in through the structural breach. The temperature in the cabin dropped sharply. Debris, loose items, food packaging, a flight attendant's service cart that had not been secured, flew toward the rear of the aircraft. But the decompression was not even the worst part. The explosive rupture of the tail section had severed critical flight control cables that ran through that area of the fuselage. On a 737, the control cables that connect the pilot's control inputs to the rudder and elevator, the control surfaces at the tail that control direction and pitch, run through the aft section of the aircraft. When the tail structure was torn apart, those cables were cut or severely damaged. In the cockpit, Captain Freeman felt the controls change beneath his hands in a way he had never felt before. The aircraft was no longer responding normally. The 737-800 began to oscillate, pitching up and down, awing left and right, in a slow, sickening rhythm. Freeman immediately reached for the controls to counter the oscillation and felt them fight back sluggishly, as though the aircraft had suddenly become a much more difficult, much less cooperative machine. Rudder authority was nearly gone. The pedals moved but the tail barely responded. Elevator authority, the ability to control pitch, to point the nose up or down, was degraded to approximately 60% of normal. Freeman looked at Tanaka. "We've got flight control damage," he said. His voice was controlled but both of them knew what those words meant. The aircraft was 380 miles from the nearest major airport, San Francisco International. It was over mountainous terrain. Night had fallen completely. Visibility was poor. They had a Boeing 737-800 carrying 157 people that was flying like a wounded animal. Captain Freeman keyed the passenger address system. What he said next was unusual. Airline captains are trained to manage passenger anxiety carefully, to be reassuring, to provide information without creating panic. But Douglas Freeman was 54 years old and had been in aviation for 30 years, and he understood that what was happening to his aircraft was beyond the normal scale of emergencies. He decided that his passengers deserved the truth. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said over the PA, and his voice was steady but heavy, "we've experienced an explosive decompression and structural damage to the aircraft. We have partial loss of flight controls. The aircraft is unstable. We're going to attempt an emergency landing, but I need to be honest with you. This is extremely dangerous. We may not make it. Flight attendants, prepare for emergency landing immediately. Everyone else, put on your oxygen masks if they haven't dropped, assume brace position, and know that we are doing everything we possibly can. I'm sorry. This is as bad as it gets." The cabin erupted. Not in screaming exactly, but in the sounds of controlled, terrified humanity. People crying quietly and holding the hands of strangers. A man in the back row praying out loud in Spanish. A young mother pulling her child tight against her chest and whispering that it was going to be okay even though she did not know if that was true. Flight attendants moving through the aisle with professional urgency, voices raised but steady, directing passengers into brace positions. Cold air from the breach screamed through the aircraft. The oxygen masks dangled above every seat. The lighting was dim and strange. The 737 continued its slow, unsettling oscillation, up and down, side to side, like a boat in rough water. In seat 11B, Dr. Rachel Lindstrom had closed her John Grisham novel. She was sitting very still. Her eyes were open. She was listening to the aircraft. This is what her 12 years of military aviation had given her that most people in the cabin did not have, the ability to listen to an aircraft the way a doctor listens to a patient's breathing. She could hear the engine sounds and the airframe sounds and the control surface sounds and put them together into a picture of what was happening. She could feel the oscillation through her seat and her feet on the floor and read it the way a sailor reads the movement of a boat through water. She knew what she was feeling. She had felt it before, not on a commercial 737 but in an F-18 that had taken battle damage over Iraq. She had landed that aircraft on a carrier deck. She had brought it home. This was a control authority problem. Not a complete failure. Partial. The aircraft was still flying. It was unstable, yes. It was oscillating. But it had not gone into an unrecoverable state. Not yet. There was a 10-second war inside Rachel Lindstrom. She thought, I left this behind. I'm not that person anymore. I'm a therapist. I'm Dr. Lindstrom. I'm nobody on this airplane. Commander Phantom is gone. And then she thought about 157 people. She thought about the mother she had seen from the corner of her eye, holding her child. She thought about the man praying in Spanish. She thought about Captain Freeman in the cockpit, fighting controls that would not fully respond, trying to figure out how to bring an oscillating aircraft down onto a runway in the dark. She unbuckled her seatbelt. Moving through a panicking aircraft cabin is not easy. The oscillation meant that the floor kept shifting slightly. Oxygen masks dangled in her face. People reached out and grabbed her arm as she passed, asking her where she was going, asking her if she knew what was happening. She said, "Let go, please. I need to get forward." Her voice was calm in a way that made people release her arm without quite understanding why. She reached the forward galley at the front of the cabin. The lead flight attendant was standing there, her back against the galley wall, her expression tight with controlled fear but her hands steady. Her name tag said Michelle. Michelle Carter. She had 16 years with Alaska Airlines. She had been through serious turbulence and diversions and one previous decompression event. She had never heard a captain say, "We may not make it," over the PA system. "I need to talk to the pilots," Rachel said. Michelle looked at her. Just another passenger. Gray sweater. Ordinary face. Reading glasses still hanging around her neck. "Ma'am, please return to your seat, Anne." "I'm a former Navy fighter pilot," Rachel said. Her voice was quiet. Not excited. Not desperate. Just clear and very direct. "I graduated from the Navy Fighter Weapons School. I flew F-18 Super Hornets in combat. I've flown damaged aircraft. I can hear what's wrong with this plane right now. I can hear it from the oscillation pattern. I know techniques for flying aircraft with degraded control authority. Techniques that commercial pilots don't learn in training. Please. Tell the captain. Let him decide. But please do it now." Michelle Carter stared at this plain, quiet woman in a gray sweater who had just said she was a Top Gun graduate, and Michelle thought, this cannot be real. But the captain had just said, "We may not make it," and if this woman was telling the truth, even a small chance was worth taking. She picked up the interphone to the cockpit. "Captain Freeman. I have a passenger up here. She says she's a former Navy fighter pilot. Top Gun graduate. She says she has experience with damaged aircraft control. She's asking to speak to you." There was a pause of 3 seconds. The aircraft pitched and rolled slightly in another oscillation cycle. "Send her in." The cockpit of a Boeing 737 is a very small room filled with instruments, switches, controls, and the concentrated attention of 2 professional pilots who are trying not to die. When Rachel stepped through the door, what she saw confirmed what she had heard from the cabin. Captain Freeman was at the controls, his hands working the yoke and his feet on the rudder pedals, fighting the oscillation. First Officer Tanaka was managing radio communications with Seattle Center, who had already declared an emergency and was vectoring them toward Sacramento International Airport, which their controllers had determined was the best option given their position and the aircraft's condition. Both men were sweating. Both were working. Both were in the place that professional pilots go to when the situation is desperate, a state of complete focused calm that looks like nothing from the outside but costs everything on the inside. Freeman saw Rachel come through the door. He saw a middle-aged woman in a gray sweater and reading glasses. His first instinct was skepticism. His second instinct was that he had 157 people on this aircraft and he was going to accept any help that was offered. "Tell me who you are," he said without taking his eyes off the instruments. "Captain Freeman," Rachel said, taking a breath, "I'm Dr. Rachel Lindstrom. Former Navy commander. F-18 Super Hornet pilot. Fighter Weapons School graduate, class of 2002. Call sign Phantom. 12 years naval aviation including carrier operations and 3 combat deployments. I left active duty in 2007. I have not flown since then. But I know damaged aircraft control techniques. What is your exact control status right now?" Freeman said, "Almost no rudder authority. Elevator authority is degraded, maybe 60%. Aircraft is oscillating in pitch and yaw. I can use ailerons and throttles but everything is sluggish and delayed and imprecise. Every input I make takes 2 or 3 seconds to produce a result and the result is not always what I intended. It's like flying through deep mud. I don't know if I can get it on the ground." Rachel listened. She felt the aircraft move beneath her feet. She watched the instruments for 5 seconds, the attitude indicator showing the aircraft's pitch and roll, the vertical speed indicator showing the rate of climb and descent, the airspeed, the heading. She said, "You're fighting the oscillations. Stop fighting them. Work with them." Freeman looked at her briefly. "Explain." Damaged aircraft have resonant frequencies. When control authority is degraded, the aircraft wants to oscillate at a specific natural rate. It's doing it right now. If you fight the oscillation, if you put in control inputs against the direction it wants to go, you create a feedback loop. You make it worse. You and the aircraft end up fighting each other and you lose because it's heavier. But if you find the rhythm, the natural frequency it wants to oscillate at, and you time your control inputs to work with that rhythm instead of against it, you can surf the oscillation instead of fighting the ocean. You put in small inputs at the right moments in the cycle. You don't try to stop the movement. You guide it. Like surfing a wave. She paused. I've done this in Hornets with battle damage. Different aircraft, much smaller and faster, but the same physics. The principles transfer. And you have an advantage I didn't have in combat, you're over flat terrain now and Sacramento has a long runway. You have time and space. But you need to stop fighting it. Tanaka looked at Freeman. He had flown military cargo aircraft for years. He understood military aviation culture. He understood what it meant to fly a damaged aircraft. He nodded once, quickly, just barely. Freeman said, "Okay, Phantom. Talk me through it." Rachel settled into the jump seat, the folding seat behind the center console designed for check pilots and jump seat riders, and buckled the harness. She had not sat in a cockpit for 5 years. The instruments around her were different from an F-18's cockpit, but the language of flight was the same. Airspeed. Attitude. Rate of descent. Control input and response. Start by just feeling it, she said. Don't input anything for the next 10 seconds. Just let the aircraft oscillate and feel the rhythm. Count the seconds between the peaks of the cycle. What followed was 41 minutes of the most precise, careful, methodical work that Captain Douglas Freeman had ever done in 21,000 hours of flying. He was a good pilot. He was better than good. But what Rachel Lindstrom gave him in those 41 minutes was something that was not in the Boeing 737 operations manual or the Alaska Airlines standard operating procedures. It was knowledge that came from a different kind of flying entirely. She counted the oscillation cycles with him. She identified the natural frequency, the aircraft pitched nose down every 8 seconds, then recovered, then pitched again. There, she said. 8-second cycle. When it pitches down at second 3, put in a small, back pressure on the yoke. Not to stop it. Just to reduce it by 20%. Then release completely. Let it do the rest. Again in 8 seconds. Freeman tried it. The oscillation reduced slightly. Not gone. But smaller. Good, Rachel said. Again. Same input. Same timing. You're not flying the aircraft right now. You're having a conversation with it. You suggest. It responds. You suggest again. She coached him on using asymmetric throttle, applying slightly more power to one engine than the other, to create directional control when the rudder would not respond adequately. This is a technique that military pilots know from flying damaged aircraft in combat. It is not in the commercial aviation textbooks because in normal operations there is no reason to do it. But in abnormal operations, when conventional controls fail, asymmetric thrust can give a pilot lateral directional control that they have lost from the control surfaces. She coached him on managing the descent rate. Sacramento International Airport was now 78 miles ahead. Their altitude was 33,000 feet. They needed to descend while maintaining enough airspeed to keep the aircraft controllable. Too slow and they would lose the small remaining control authority they had. Too fast and the descent would be too steep and too fast for a safe approach. Think of it as a glide path management problem, Rachel said. You're not trying to fly the aircraft normally. You're trying to guide a partially broken system to a specific point on a runway. The system wants to go its own way. You give it gentle suggestions toward where you need it to be. Firm suggestions when necessary. But always working with its natural tendencies, not against them. Tanaka was managing communications. Sacramento Approach Control was talking them down. Emergency vehicles were being positioned at the airport. Air traffic control had cleared Sacramento's airspace completely, every other aircraft was being held or diverted. The runway was theirs. And then, 30 minutes into the descent, something else happened. Two F-16 Fighting Falcons from the California Air National Guard's 144th Fighter Wing had scrambled from Fresno Yosemite International Airport. The Air Force and Guard maintain alert aircraft, armed, ready fighters that can take off on short notice in response to emergencies, and when Alaska Airlines 283 had declared an emergency over Northern California with reported structural damage, the scramble order had gone out. The two F-16s had climbed to altitude and found the damaged 737 with their radar, then descended to fly alongside it and conduct a visual assessment of the structural damage. The lead F-16 pilot was Major Christina Park. Her call sign was Vixen. She was 36 years old and had been flying with the 144th for 13 years. She had 2,300 flight hours in the F-16. She was a fighter weapons school graduate herself, the Air Force version, at Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada. She was considered one of the best pilots in her unit. She pulled her F-16 into close formation off the right wing of the damaged 737, close enough to see the tail section clearly in the darkness with her aircraft's lights and the aircraft's own lighting. The damage was severe. She could see the torn metal at the tail, the jagged edges where the pressure bulkhead had failed. She could see that the tail section was partially compromised. She reported the damage assessment to the emergency coordination frequency. But what made her key her radio mic a second time was something she heard while monitoring the frequency, the voice coming from inside Alaska 283, coaching the pilots through the approach. She was hearing specific terminology. Specific techniques. Things that you hear in a military aviation environment. Things that you hear at fighter weapons school. Alaska 283, Vixen transmitted, "This is Vixen 1, California Air National Guard, currently in formation off your right wing. I'm monitoring your cockpit communications. I'm hearing someone providing flight instruction using specific weapons school terminology. Who is your instructor?" In the cockpit of the 737, Rachel had been so focused on coaching Captain Freeman through the approach that she had almost forgotten anyone could hear her. She reached for the radio and pressed the transmit button. "Vixen 1, this is Rachel Lindstrom. Former Navy commander. F/A-18 Super Hornet pilot. Fighter Weapons School Class of 2002. Call sign Phantom. I am currently a passenger aboard Alaska 283. I'm in the jump seat assisting the captain with damaged aircraft control techniques. How does the tail look?" There was silence on the frequency for exactly 3 seconds. Then Major Christina Park's voice came back, and it was different than it had been before. The professional emergency coordination tone was still there, but something else had entered it. Something close to disbelief. "Phantom. Commander Phantom from VFA 41. The Phantom who wrote the Asymmetric Combat Maneuvering Tactics paper. The paper on asymmetric engagement that's been required reading at weapons school for the last 8 years." Rachel felt something she had not felt in 5 years. She felt recognized. Not as Dr. Lindstrom the therapist, the invisible woman, the person who had worked so hard to be forgettable. Recognized as someone else. Recognized by name. Recognized by the work she had done. Recognized by the person she had been before everything went wrong. She said, "That's me." Major Park transmitted, "Alaska 283, I want you to know, your pilots have a Top Gun legend coaching their approach. Phantom, I read your tactics papers at weapons school. You taught half the Navy and half the Air Force how to think about asymmetric engagements. Multiple generations of fighter pilots have learned from your work. Ma'am, it is genuinely an honor to be flying formation with you tonight, even under these circumstances. Bring them home, Phantom. The tail looks bad but it's holding. Show these people what Top Gun really means." In the jump seat of Alaska Airlines Flight 283, at 33,000 feet descending toward Sacramento, Dr. Rachel Lindstrom, Commander Phantom, felt something inside her begin to break. The wall she had built between who she used to be and who she had tried to become. The careful architecture of the invisible woman in the gray sweater. It was cracking. She thought about the children in Afghanistan. She thought about the nightmares. She thought about leaving the Navy and getting the PhD and the gray sweaters and the reading glasses and the John Grisham novels and the 5 years of trying to be no one. And then she thought about 157 people. She keyed the radio. Vixen 1, thank you. Stay on our wing. We're approximately 30 miles from Sacramento. I'm going to walk the captain through the final approach now. Keep reporting if the tail condition changes. Roger that, Phantom. We've got you. The last 20 miles of the approach to Sacramento were the hardest. At lower altitudes, with lower airspeed, the aircraft became more difficult to control. The oscillations changed character slightly as the aerodynamics changed. Rachel had to recalibrate her coaching. The timing of Freeman's inputs that had worked at 15,000 feet was slightly different at 5,000 feet. The cycle is faster now, she told him. We're at 6 seconds. Adjust your timing. 6 seconds. Smaller inputs. You're getting closer to the ground and small mistakes have bigger consequences. Smaller, more frequent. Don't try to correct a full cycle. Correct half a cycle. Freeman was sweating. He had been flying this wounded aircraft for 38 minutes and the concentration required had been total and exhausting. But he was still flying. He had not surrendered. He had taken every piece of coaching Rachel had given him and applied it with the patient precision of a man who had spent 21,000 hours learning exactly this kind of discipline. Sacramento International Airport appeared below and ahead in the darkness, a spread of runway lights and taxiway lights and the approach lights leading into the threshold of runway 16L. A long runway. Plenty of room for an unstable approach. Emergency vehicles lined both sides of the runway, fire trucks, ambulances, emergency response teams, all lights flashing. Gear down, Rachel said. Threshold speed, add 15 knots over your normal approach speed. The instability means you need the extra margin. You will be fast. That is correct. Do not try to slow to normal speed. Freeman extended the landing gear. The aircraft buffeted slightly from the change in aerodynamics. Still with you, she said. The buffet is normal. It will settle. Count to 4. She counted with him. Flaps to landing position. Slowly. The flaps extended. The 737 to 800 settled into what was almost an approach attitude. Almost but not quite, it was still oscillating gently, still imprecise, still slightly nose high and then slightly nose low and then slightly nose high again in its 6-second cycle. Captain Freeman, Rachel said, and for the first time in 41 minutes her voice had something in it beyond pure technical instruction. You have done extraordinary work tonight. The aircraft is manageable. You know what to do. For the last 1,000 feet, trust what you have learned tonight. You know its rhythm now. You know its frequency. Land it the same way you have been flying it. Small inputs, correct timing, work with it not against it. You can do this. Freeman said, talk me down. 1,000 feet. Oscillation check, you're stable in the cycle. 500 feet. Visual contact with the runway. Hold your approach angle. Small back pressure at second 3 of the cycle. Release. Again. 300 feet. Stay with it. Airspeed is good. 100 feet. You're almost there. 50 feet. Ease back slightly, now. Flare. The Boeing 737-800 Alaska Airlines Flight 283 touched down on runway 16L at Sacramento International Airport at 8:21 p.m. Pacific Time. The touchdown was firm. It was not pretty. It was not the smooth grease job that passengers appreciate on normal flights. It was a controlled, firm, deliberate contact with the runway of a seriously damaged aircraft that had been hand-coached through the last 40 minutes of its flight by a woman who hadn't been in a cockpit for 5 years. The main gear hit, then the nose wheel, and the aircraft settled onto the runway and began to roll. Freeman immediately deployed the thrust reversers and applied brakes. The aircraft decelerated. It stayed on the runway centerline. It did not veer. It did not collapse. It rolled out and slowed and stopped, well within the available runway length, with emergency vehicles converging from both sides. All 157 passengers and crew members of Alaska Airlines Flight 283 were alive. There were injuries, some minor cuts and bruises from the decompression event, 2 people with strained muscles from the sudden movements of the aircraft, but no fatalities. No serious injuries. Everyone walked off that aircraft. The Sacramento Approach Control Tower controller transmitted, Alaska 283, outstanding. That was some of the most precise damaged aircraft flying we have ever witnessed from this tower. Phantom, your coaching was masterful. Well done. Welcome home. 2 words. Welcome home. Rachel Lindstrom sat in the jump seat of the stopped aircraft on a dark runway in Sacramento, California, and she began to cry. When the emergency response teams boarded, they found Rachel still in the jump seat. One of the paramedics tried to guide her out. She shook her head. She was not hurt. She was just not ready to move yet. Captain Freeman turned in his seat. His face was still tight from 41 minutes of the most intense flying of his career. He looked at Rachel, this ordinary-looking woman who had walked into his cockpit when he had no good options and had given him the thing he needed most. "You saved everyone," he said. "You saved all of them. You're a hero." He paused. "Why did you leave flying?" Rachel wiped her face with the sleeve of her gray sweater. She looked at the instrument panel for a moment. Then she looked at Captain Freeman. "In 2006, she said, I dropped bombs on a compound in Afghanistan. I was given intelligence that said it was a Taliban target. The intelligence was wrong. There was a family in that compound. 7 civilians died. 3 of them were children." Freeman was quiet. "The investigation cleared me," Rachel said. "The military said it was a legitimate target based on available information. Intelligence failure, not pilot error. Case closed. I was cleared and the Navy said I could continue my career." She paused. "I couldn't continue. I kept seeing those children. I kept thinking that I had been so proud of my skill, so proud of being Phantom, so proud of how precisely and effectively I could execute a mission, and what the precision and effectiveness had produced was 3 dead children. I couldn't reconcile being good at killing with being a good person. I thought maybe I was broken. Maybe being Phantom, the one who attacks without warning, the one nobody sees coming, maybe that was just a pretty name for something ugly inside me. So I left. Got a PhD, became a therapist. Tried to help people heal from trauma because I couldn't heal from mine. Tried to forget that Commander Phantom had ever existed." She looked out the window at the emergency lights on the Sacramento runway. "But tonight," she said. "Tonight Phantom came back. And this time she saved people instead of killing them. The same skills. The same tactical thinking. The same ability to read a situation and make decisions when there are no good options. Tonight those skills kept 157 people alive." She shook her head slowly. "That doesn't erase the 3 children. Nothing erases that. But maybe it means Phantom isn't only a killer. Maybe Phantom can also be a protector. Maybe both things were always true, and I only let myself see one of them." First Officer Kevin Tanaka, who had been quiet through this entire exchange, said, "I flew cargo in the Guard for 9 years. I knew guys who never came home from bad missions. I knew guys who came home and couldn't live with themselves. What you just did, staying calm, working the problem, coaching a solution when most people would have been paralyzed, "That's not a broken person, Commander. That's the most whole person I've seen in an aviation emergency." The story broke the next morning. Aviation emergencies always attract media attention, and this one was unusual even by the standards of aviation emergencies. A catastrophic pressure bulkhead failure combined with partial flight control loss was one of the most serious structural emergencies in modern commercial aviation. The fact that the flight had landed safely with all 157 people alive was remarkable. The fact that a civilian passenger had coached the landing from the jump seat using military fighter pilot techniques was extraordinary. Reporters tracked down Rachel's naval aviation record through public military databases. They found her service history. They found the fighter weapons school graduation. They found her 3 combat deployments and her rank of commander. They found mentions of "Phantom" in archived documents. They knocked on her Portland therapist office door. They called her phone. They sent emails. Rachel gave one interview. She gave it because she decided that hiding was finished. She had been hiding for 5 years, and the hiding had not healed anything. She had become invisible and the nightmares had still come. She had become Dr. Lindstrom and Commander Phantom had still been inside her, unchanged, preserved by denial. Maybe the only way forward was through the truth. She sat across from the interviewer and said, "I left the Navy because I could not reconcile being good at killing with being a good person. I thought those two things were incompatible. I thought being Phantom, the one who strikes without warning, the one who kills with precision, I thought being that person made me broken inside. So I hid. I became someone else. I became the therapist who helps people heal from trauma because I could not heal from my own. I put on invisible clothes and cut my hair and carried a John Grisham novel and tried to be nobody. But Thursday night showed me something. The skills that made me Phantom, situational awareness, tactical analysis, staying calm when every system is failing, making clear decisions when there are no good options, those skills save lives too. They are not inherently about killing. They are tools. They can be used to destroy. They can also be used to protect and to save. Thursday night I used them to help a captain bring a broken aircraft and 157 people safely to the ground. That doesn't erase what happened in Afghanistan. I will carry those 3 children for the rest of my life. But it means that Phantom is not only a killer. It means I don't have to be only one thing. I am Dr. Rachel Lindstrom. Trauma therapist. I am Commander Phantom. Top Gun graduate. Naval aviator. Both. Not one or the other. Both. And I think that's okay. I think that's actually who I was always supposed to be. 3 weeks after the Sacramento landing, Rachel received a phone call from the Naval Strike and Air Warfare Center at Fallon, Nevada. The Fighter Weapons School. The person calling was the current commanding officer, a 2-star admiral who had been a student at Fallon during the years when Rachel's tactics papers were being written. Commander Lindstrom, the admiral said, the Navy has been watching what happened on Flight 283 very closely. The techniques you coached Captain Freeman through are not currently in our curriculum. We have never systematically taught commercial pilots or even military pilots the kind of resonant frequency management and asymmetric thrust compensation you used on that aircraft. We should. And we think you should teach it. Rachel said, I'm a civilian now. I'm a therapist. I haven't flown in 5 years. We know, the admiral said. We're not asking you to go back to active duty. We're asking you to come to Fallon as a civilian instructor. We want you to teach fighter pilots and potentially commercial aviation instructors your damaged aircraft control methodology. We also, the admiral paused, we have a secondary request, which is more unusual. We have been thinking for some years about the psychological dimension of combat aviation. The trauma that combat pilots carry. The PTSD. The difficulty of reconciling the skills of violence with a healthy sense of self. We think we need someone who can address both dimensions, the tactical and the psychological. We think you're the only person in the world qualified to do both. Rachel sat in her Portland office for a long time after the call ended. She looked at the diplomas on her wall, the PhD from Portland State, the certification from the American Psychological Association. She looked at the small framed photograph on her desk that she had kept even through everything, taken from the deck of a carrier, looking up at an F-16 on its catapult, the ocean in the background, the sky brilliant blue. She had kept that photograph through all 5 years of hiding. She had told herself she kept it as a reminder. Now she thought maybe she had kept it because some part of her had known all along. She accepted. 2 years later, Dr. Rachel Lindstrom, Commander Phantom, held a unique position at the Naval Strike and Air Warfare Center at NAS Fallon, Nevada. She was the only civilian instructor in the school's history. She taught 2 different curricula, and she was extraordinary at both. On Monday and Wednesday mornings she stood in front of fighter pilots and worked through her damaged aircraft control methodology, the physics of resonant frequencies in compromised airframes, the use of asymmetric thrust to compensate for lost control surface authority, the psychology of working with a broken machine instead of fighting it. Students came from the Navy, the Air Force, the Marine Corps. Some of them had heard of Phantom before they arrived. All of them left knowing exactly who she was. On Tuesday and Thursday afternoons she worked with pilots individually and in small groups on a different kind of damage. The damage that combat does to the person inside the pilot. The nightmares. The faces that appear in quiet moments. The difficulty of being skilled at violence and remaining a whole human being. She did not pretend she had all the answers. She shared what she had learned. She talked about Afghanistan. She talked about what it had cost her and what it had cost her to hide. She talked about what Thursday night in September 2012 had taught her about integration, about being more than one thing, about carrying contradictions without being destroyed by them. When new students arrived at fighter weapons school and heard about the civilian instructor with the call sign Phantom and asked what the story was, she would tell them. She would tell them about being invisible for 5 years. About the gray sweater and the John Grisham novel and the deliberate practice of being nobody. About a rainy Thursday in Portland and a middle seat and an aircraft tearing apart at 33,000 feet. I hid for 5 years, she would say to them. I was a ghost. Not Phantom the fighter pilot ghost, a real ghost. A person who had stopped existing. I thought if I could become invisible enough, Commander Phantom would stop existing too. The memories would stop coming. The guilt would stop being real. If nobody could see me, then nothing I had done could be real either. But Thursday night, 157 people needed Phantom. Not the ghost. The actual pilot. The one who knew how to think under pressure and work with broken systems and stay calm when nothing is working. And when Phantom came back, when I let her come back, she didn't destroy anyone. She protected people. Ghosts can become real again. Phantoms can step into the light. That's what that night taught me. You cannot hide from who you are. The only question is what you do with it. I choose both. Fighter pilot and healer. Commander and doctor. Phantom and Rachel. All of it. That is who I am. Outside the classroom windows at NAS Fallon, the Nevada desert stretched in every direction under the hard blue sky. F divided by a -18s and F-35s taxied on the flight line. The mountains in the distance were sharp against the horizon. Somewhere on the flight schedule, a class of young fighter pilots was preparing to go up and learn what being the best really means. And in the classroom, the woman in the plain clothes with the pale blue-gray eyes looked out at them and was completely, exactly, entirely herself. Both of herselves. All of them. Home. There is a woman on a commercial flight who looks completely ordinary. She is wearing a gray sweater. She is reading a John Grisham novel. She has the kind of face you forget the moment you look away. But when this flight starts to fall apart at 33,000 feet, she is going to walk to the cockpit, sit in the jump seat, and do something that will change everything. Because the ordinary woman is not ordinary at all. She is Commander Phantom. Top Gun legend. And she has been hiding for 5 years. Tonight the hiding ends. The cabin of Alaska 283 had been silent for years in Rachel's nightmares, replaced by the silence of a compound in Afghanistan, the silence after ordnance falls, the silence that follows irreversible action. For 5 years she had lived in that silence. She had insulated herself in it. She had made herself small and invisible so that the silence could not find her in crowds, could not identify her in waiting rooms and grocery lines and coffee shops. She had become the gray sweater and the tote bag and the reading glasses. She had become the kind of woman that nobody remembers. But silence and invisibility had not healed her. They had preserved her, the way cold preserves something, kept it unchanged, kept it from developing further, kept it exactly as broken as it had been the day she had stopped. She had been a preserved wound for 5 years. Careful. Quiet. Not bleeding anymore, but not healed either. Flight 283 had cracked the preservation open. In the cockpit, coaching Captain Freeman through the oscillation cycles, she had felt something she did not expect, she had felt useful. Not despite being phantom but because of it. Her skills, the ones she had been so ashamed of, the ones she had associated exclusively with death and destruction, had kept 157 people alive. The same mind that had calculated weapons release points over Afghanistan had calculated resonant frequencies and asymmetric thrust ratios over Northern California. The same calm that had allowed her to execute precision strikes in combat had allowed her to coach a panicking pilot through a precision emergency landing. The same was the same. The outcome was different. She thought about this often in the years that followed. She thought about it in her therapy sessions with the pilots at Fallon, some of whom carried their own versions of her wound, the person they had been in combat, the person they were trying to be at home, the gap between those two people that felt like a canyon. She told them what she had learned. Not the theory. The actual experience. What it felt like to believe you were broken and then discover you were not. What it felt like to stop hiding from yourself. The skills are neutral, she told them. What we do with them is the question. That question never stops. You ask it every day. Every mission. Every decision. You cannot answer it once and be done. You have to keep answering it. But you can answer it. That's what I want you to know. You can answer it. And you can still be someone worth being.